So here I am back with part two of that art of hosting. This one being on the methods and the different ways. So, and you can see a lot of notes here down the side, which I'm going to dig into and hopefully add extra. So, the circle, I quite often use this format for sitting in classes, or it's more of a semicircle because I also have the crutch of a presentation. It helps me to remember, it makes me feel very safe, although I often feel very, very proud when I can do lessons that step away from the PowerPoint. So I know that these are lessons on a PowerPoint, but nobody wants to sit and look at my face for that amount of time, or at least I don't. Um, so yeah, circles are a really ancient technique. They are a leveling technique where everybody is in the same boat. You can see everybody. So they feel inclusive. They can also feel very off putting to start with because there is nowhere to hide. One thing, and it's the only time that those little tables are nice, is that they offer a teensy tiny bit of protection because you can feel very exposed in a circle. Um, but yes, they are a way to feel held, to have, as it says in the side here, I think this kind of point down here with confidentiality can feel, leadership can rotate. There's not necessarily one person in the circle who has more power than others. So it's a really good space um, to, and you see it up here in the notes, I think, for checking in and checking out. Checking in and checking out, these are the kind of like hosting yourself spaces where it's like, how am I feeling right now? Where is my energy? Where is my focus? To Joey from Friends, right? A very simple check in is how you doing, and not as in you want to whip your clothes off and sleep with Joey Trippiani, but as in how are you actually feeling and doing right now. Um, I'm often, and this is something I have to get braver at, I often do it in a private message afterwards when I notice that someone is not engaged. But having space to actually check in and check out, you can see, for example, why somebody might have got disengaged. So, say somebody at the beginning of a lesson seems, or a conversation or a piece of work seems very engaged, and at the end they seem really disengaged, you might walk away from that thinking, oh, I did a terrible job. Or if you checked out, they might say, hey, I just got this really emotional message from back home, and so I lost my focus there. And then you see, oh, wow, I was so much in my own head that I didn't check in or check out with the people around and what they're doing. So it's a very simple technique where you sit in a circle and you have a conversation. One also technique that I learned in my master's here for making this circle, and indeed for making lessons, when people need a break from this, or you can use different signals, right? You can use like the jazz hands for agreement. You can use a talking piece, it could be a pen or a cuddly toy or something that goes around, and only the person that has this talks. And this could also be a way to invite people into talk who are very quiet, that you place the talking piece with them, and then they are invited to speak. But also this one idea with everybody usually has shoes on, and when there are, my friend uses this technique of so in a circle you can see, and when there are three shoes in the middle, that means more than two people are in need, or at least two people are in need of a break, because most of us are not wearing three shoes. Um, and therefore that's one way of asking for a pause in the proceedings here. So I have tried this in many times, but there's also weirdly a lot of people with foot phobias, and so the thought of people taking their shoes off or taking their own shoes off is very off-putting. So I guess you could use something else, but yeah, that's one possibility. Then a another um, methodology that's used is appreciative inquiry. We can see in the notes on the side here, it's that in every situation, something works. It might be a very small thing, it might be, but that we can take the good out of something. So appreciate the best of what is. So discover the reality of the situation that you're in. And then you can see the next step in the diagram here is dream, envision what might be, design together different ideas, and then do, and then maybe you go round and round again. What appreciative inquiry is able to do is very often when we're designing together, it's very easy to get emotions very high, where people feel like they're being put down, where their ideas are not being as seen or heard or taken into account as others. And what appreciative inquiry does, instead of ripping apart ideas, it takes what's good in the idea. So instead of so for example, the first step there with discover, you might have proposed something. I don't know right now, not feeling all that creative. But you might propose something, and then usually you might introduce that to the group, and people are like, oh no, that'll never work because of this, and that won't work because of that, and blah, blah, blah. And then you feel like, ugh, why do I even bother? Whereas what appreciative inquiry does is say, okay, I don't think that in entirety is going to work, but what I love about the idea is this and this. So how about we take those elements, and then we get to the dream element, we add others, design element, we add others, we put it into practice, we go back round again. So it's about seeing what's great even in the worst. It's that kind of idea that even in, excuse the language, shit, things will blossom because it's nutrients for things, right? The cow's dung is spread on the fields for plants to grow. So that nice appreciative, and it's just a much more positive way of dealing with your fellow human beings, of making them feel heard, and of getting to more positive ideas. And hopefully you don't end up at the end of it with, you've taken parts from ideas, but you're not acknowledging it. I'm sure we've all been in situations where you get to the end of something and you're like, well, that's kind of what I proposed to start with. And it's frustrating. So appreciative inquiry tries to springboard over that by actually building that, taking out the positive in everything right from the start. Then you have World Cafe. And this is usually a setup to look like a cafe, and where you have maybe different courses of questions to dig deeper into, or different topics that go together. And usually a good way to harvest from this, Art of Hosting uses the word harvest to collect the knowledge, the ideas, the inputs that people have given. That's just harvesting. Yeah, and as you see in the side there, it's to create a space, host a space that is welcoming. So how it works, 4 or 5 people around a table, that's a good number to still allow people to talk. If you end up with more than this, then people that are more shy, less certain about their capabilities to put an input or something might be silenced in this. Also, if you're in a bigger group, you tend to have somebody who dominates and leads. 3 rounds of questions, could be more. Maybe you're having a 7-course meal. So as many rounds of questions as you like, usually 20 to 30 minutes per question. Even if people finish beforehand, you can always go around and encourage, is there something more you want to say about this point or that point? And You might be moving people around the questions, but you would then have somebody stay who is the host, who would be making notes during the previous conversation. They would fill in the newcomers, and then those newcomers would add into that. So it's a way to dig deeper into different issues, because you could have questions, that start at this nice, easy, comfortable, superficial level, and by, course 7, you're right down into the deep understanding how it is. So it's good to have a nice setting. We've done this at IPC before. Gertrude and I dressing up as waitresses, complete with tea towels over our arms and little aprons. A welcome and an intro and a check-in, perhaps. How are people doing? Why are they here? What are we doing? Those small groups. Good questions are important, and harvesting is also just as important. You really want to make sure that you have somebody who is hosting and recording, whether they're 1 or 2 people, so that information from the discussions doesn't get lost. And powerful questions are a good thing. And next little video. That's one explaining World Cafe. Let's make this full screen.
World Cafe is a very simple process where people come together in a hospitable space that is very much like a cafe. They have a conversation around an important question, and the communities can come to understanding that they may have not had before.
You want to focus on a question that matters to the people who are coming together and put time into really crafting that question well. First of all, the question, given the changes and challenges facing us in our communities, what questions are you asking yourself as a leader? So the question we want you to explore is really one of those questions that you're asking yourself. So the basics is that you have small round tables where people talk, and you have a series of rounds of conversation. And people only stay at that small table for a period of time, say 20, 30 minutes or so, and then they move to another table and have another conversation with different people, often on the same question or a variation of the question that you put together.
In order to tap into the collective intelligence of the group, the greater the participation, the greater the potential is for collective wisdom.
We switch tables because we want to access ideas across the whole room. We want people to hear each other, so that we're trying to access not a list of differing ideas, but we're trying to help groups access group wisdom. It's kind of like seeds that are growing all around the room in these different tables, and they're connecting up to each other. So it becomes a very generative process as well.
I think what's different about World Cafe is it's a great way to consolidate a lot of ideas, not just thoughts, but a lot of ideas. There's a real focus on literally listening to the people at the table. There aren't that many people at the table. So you get to go deeper, faster, I think, in the individual's thinking.
Hello, hi. Are you the host? I am.
At each table, you ask someone to be a host, and the host's role is to stay at that table for all 3 rounds and to give a little summary of some of the key patterns or key thoughts of the conversation that happened in the first round to the new people who are coming to their table for the second round. Also, often we ask the host to make sure that there is some kind of a capture of key ideas or thoughts, and so we call that the harvest. And it might be, that you ask people to capture on a flip chart page right on the table some of the key learnings or the key ideas that were at that table. In this case, what we're doing is asking people to just capture one question at the end of each round from each table, and we're asking the table host to make sure that happens.
What are my beliefs that limit me from seeing possibilities?
How can we shift the understanding of leadership to ensure sustainability?
What I appreciate about World Cafe is you're talking with very small groups of people, and you're allowed to shift conversations. So instead of sitting with the same group of people and trying to tackle the same question together, which can sometimes bring you to a dead end, the opportunity with World Cafe is you get to have different ideas brought in, every 20 minutes. So when you harvest at the end of the process, you really have, I think, a very different perspective on what you're trying to achieve than what you might achieve through a traditional brainstorm where you're sitting at a table trying to tackle a question.
There's no right or wrong. It's about finding the common ground so that we can create a new solution that wasn't there before.
Oof. I think I'm starting to learn what I love about this technique is that possibility for those questions. Like a possibility for people to sit down and genuinely talk about the questions, the queries, the worries, the fears that they have on their mind right then. So, next technique, open space technology. We see down here a good format when there is a real issue of concern, a diversity of players, complexity of elements, presence of passion, and a need for a quick decision. What does that mean? So open space technology. So in the World Cafe, the host will come with those questions. The questions, as you saw, they were actually hosting questions to get more questions, to get people to dig into and be able to answer those later, perhaps in a pro-action cafe, which often leads on after, and I think it's coming after this. Whereas open space technology is where all of the people that have been invited in the space get to propose issues that are of real concern to them. So we've often done this in evaluations, and very often, somebody comes with, food is what we need to talk about. One year, some guy came up and he wanted to talk about big trucks. And so he hosted a conversation about big trucks because that was what was on his mind right then. But it's, it would allow in an organization people from all sorts of positions, whether it's a hierarchical or a flat organization, to come forward and say, hey, I want to have a conversation around this. And then those principles that you see on the picture come into place. Which is whoever comes is the right person. So maybe you're only 2 people in the room, but you're 2 people in that organization that are passionate about this, that care about this, that have a stake in this. So you're the right 2 people to be talking about this. Whenever it starts is the right time. I always find this principle strange because usually open space technology is used within a conference setting. So there is time when there's time. So then the third also fits with that, with when it's over, because again, it's usually given at least a set amount of time in a timetable. So maybe it's over beforehand, but yeah, these 2 are not necessarily so easy to keep up. And then whatever happens is supposed to happen. So within this open space, you have different roles. So you have the initiator. This is the one that's going to come with the topic that you see over here. Then you have the bumblebee. And this is going to be a person that moves from place to place and, much as a bumblebee does, pollinates. So they're moving between different topics, as you see here, and they're bringing information, input, ideas, thoughts from those different conversations into their new conversation. So they're cross-pollinating those ideas like a bumblebee does. A butterfly, this is a person that moves from conversation to conversation, but is not necessarily bringing those juicy bits of pollen and nectar to pollinate. They are just moving in between. Perhaps participating more on the periphery. They might be good at give people to consult if you want an overview of what happened, but they're not necessarily going to mix the different topics. And then you have the listener, who is somebody who is, as it says, there to listen. And this is really important because if you're talking about something that is an issue to you, that you're passionate about, you want to be listened to. And then we have those more principles. The law of 2 feet, which means you go to the conversations that attract you. And it also goes together with the law of 2 cheeks, which means that 2 cheeks is in your butt cheeks, that you can stay in the conversations that interest you. So that's open space technology where everybody can decide what's going to be talked about and people can participate in the different roles. Again, it's important to have paper, or at least to have the initiator or the listener being somebody who is harvesting and taking notes, so those deep conversations and ideas and inputs are not lost. Collective mind mapping, we see on the side there, it's about having a burning question. Rules, everybody's ideas are important. And basically, this is really good if you have a wall like they do here, or a giant piece of paper, where you, as it says, there aren't rules. You perhaps will place lines as they have done here to connect different ideas, or maybe you start a new tangent off here. And it's a way of getting collective knowledge down onto a piece of paper, so you're not necessarily controlled. How it's different to normal mind mapping is usually done by one person, or you've got one person recording it, which means that they might translate, and not through any malicious or hurtful way, but they might translate what you're saying into something else. And that, of course, changes the input slightly. This way, you're able to add for yourself in your own words and to show how you would connect things. So there's not just one person in charge of how the different pieces connect. And then you see over here on the notes, it says you can use sticky dots or dots to vote at the end. So if there are a lot of ideas on there and you want to think about where you follow next, a very democratic way is either everybody gets a pen or a little sticker or a few stickers, depending on how many ideas you're willing to pursue, and they're able to put those next to the ones that they feel most connected to. In that case, it's voting where you can see where the majority of people have interest to dig deeper or to take action. And then we have the Pro Action Cafe. I mentioned already that this usually follows on from a World Cafe. So you've usually already had a discussion about what you want to do, and then the Pro Action Cafe is more about designing the way that you're going to do that. Here it says 3 rounds, so what is the quest behind the call? So reiterating that purpose that you've maybe come up with in the World Cafe, or open space technique where you're like, this is what, or the collective mind mapping, this is what we're going to work on. And then you design that. And why this question is here is that it's always referring back to, very often in design processes, we get so caught up in our good ideas that we forget why we were coming up with these good ideas. And that's why that focus of that first round is really, it's good to have an anchor here. Again, you want somebody who can put the record the information and so that it can be harvested, but also maybe having an anchor, somebody who always brings you back to, okay, but the purpose of why we're designing this or doing this or changing this is because of this. Are we doing that? And then there's even more focus on that in the second round with what are we missing? If this is our goal, what are we missing? What are we not looking at? What are we what are our blind spots? Which is a very difficult conversation to have because they're called blind spots for a reason. But of course, if, like in the World Cafe, you are moving around, you have a diverse group of people that are working, you may be more, people from the outside may be more capable of seeing your blind spots than you are. And then round 3, a bit more reflective in what am I learning about myself and my project? Have you taken on a particular role that surprised you? Is there something in the solution that is still not sitting well with you? And can you think about why? And then harvesting that. And There's good questions for the harvest there of what am I grateful for? Again, perhaps leaning back towards that appreciative inquiry in terms of not getting to the end of the process and thinking, oh God, let me out of here. I don't want to sit here any longer. But instead thinking about, okay, what did I learn here and where am I going to next? So yeah, very much about keeping the focus of your design and your action on your whole reason for being there. And the setup is very much the same as the World Cafe, different rounds, different tables, making sure that the information is harvested along the way. Next technique, storytelling, works in all of the different methods that have been mentioned so far. It is man's oldest management, branding, advertising, connection tool. I think it was said in both of the videos, to one sense or another, that storytelling allows us, and art of hosting is based on that storytelling, to connect as humans, to see other perspectives. And only when we see other perspectives can we begin to co-create, have dialogue, be sustainable, because we're actually not ignoring other human beings, but including them in. And those storytelling, there are different threads that you can pick up. What can we learn? The application here, what can we learn from the story to apply to our own life? What principles can be gleaned from the story? Very often stories about moral challenges. Do we have questions? Can we scale what's happening here? Were there breakthroughs? And most brands use storytelling as a way to sell, but it's also, you're not just selling to a customer, you're also selling to your employees. So you want to be thinking about who they are, what they're doing. At IPC, many of us are aware of why the school was built, and I think when you get the time and the space in your career there to actually think of the purpose of that place, then your drive to work and contribute becomes a little different. Then we have action learning. One of the member of the group is a problem presenter and one plays the coach. So the guidelines to this action learning: take 2 to 3 minutes to highlight key elements of the problem. Trust the group to ask important information and details. Be brief. Answer questions concisely. Don't be afraid to say I don't know or I'm not sure. And feel free to ask questions of others. So you have one person who's in charge of bringing the problem forward. So perhaps the person who feels most passionately about it, and they are going to, a bit like being in Alcoholics Anonymous or whatever, they're going to stand up or sit in the group and say, hey, I have a problem because this, and this. Then the others that are sitting around in the circle, they're going to try and understand by asking more questions, open questions, perhaps making statements of support in some way. So it's a bit like, as you see by the name of the next one, a coaching session. So imagine yourself dealing with the problem in action learning, as I said, like you are. And there's stereotypical that we see on movies, at Alcoholics or Drugs Anonymous, where you sit there and you say what is going on with your life, and then the other people are trying, first just the other participants are trying to get clarity as to, and it's not clarity with judgment, it's clarity without judgment. So they're just asking questions to try and see if they understand what you're saying correctly. And then the learning coach sees, okay, how is this going? What are your proposed solutions? And tries to keep the group on track so that there isn't this idea of judgment, but instead there is this idea of listening and accepting, and offering that positive response. And last but not least, and it's a technique used in many other things and not just in art of hosting, but dialogue. And I like this description of it. It's a conversation with a center and not sides. So it's not debating. It's not about being right or wrong. It's not about having this strong argument. But it is about these different points that we have here. And I'm sorry, I'm going to be a hypocrite and I'm going to read because I make good notes for a reason. So the 4 basic skills of dialogue: listening, respecting, suspending, and voicing. So listening, develop an inner silence. Stick with the facts, not jumping to conclusions. Actually, truly listen. And if you find yourself drifting off, perhaps pause the person and ask a question of clarification. Ask if they just be honest about, hey, my attention is starting to drift and I am not listening anymore and I would like to listen. So perhaps I need this broken up into smaller pieces for me. Respect. Hold space open for challenge. Nothing worse than having a toddler tantrum in the middle of what's supposed to be a dialogue, and just telling the other person they're wrong because that's not a dialogue, that's just a rant. But yeah, respecting the other person's boundaries, asking questions respectfully, trying not to judge. And this also means looking at your body language in many of these sentences. Suspending. So in this way, you see in the list on the side, recognize and embracing surprise. Very often we do have inner bias and blind spots, and sometimes in dialogue those can be made open. And to recognize that, and instead of turning that into defensiveness because maybe you feel a little stupid for not realizing that sooner, then you can take that second step and disclose and make your inner thoughts visible. Observe your own thought process. Are you, again, is stopping to listen because you feel disrespected, or you feel like this is polarizing in some way? And of course, in dialogue, we are not talking about fixing another person. We are sharing ideas. And then last but not least, voicing. And we see here, ask yourself what needs to be expressed. Maybe you have a thought. Does it really need to be shared, or is it, part of that process and you've moved on from it? Speaking from the heart, even, being emotional in a dialogue is not necessarily wrong as long as you're emotional and respectful at the same time. Allowing for silence if you don't know how to answer it in person, perhaps even just saying that I don't know how to answer. And speaking, dialogue and conversation is not about putting down other people, but about uplifting everyone. So this idea that you don't need to fix or win or come out on top or whatever it is that you have a false conception of. Dialogue really is about just being listened to and heard. And so those are some of the techniques of art of hosting. I hope you find them useful in your life moving forward. And I guess this will be up on YouTube until it gets deleted for some reason. Who would know why? But thank you for listening. And that's part 2 with the techniques and methods of the art of hosting.